Hey, what's up everybody? It's GC Kinsey, here to talk about my journey with pronouns and how I figured out that he, him are the right ones for me. Pronouns can play an important role in how someone expresses and affirms their gender. And when someone transitions, that often involves a shift in pronouns. But that shift isn't always straightforward. Sometimes it's more like a long and winding journey. And I wish that was something we talked about more, because there can be a lot of pressure to figure out your pronouns right away. So I wanted to share my own pronoun journey just in case any of you can learn from it or relate to it. Let's start with a little backstory. I experienced some masculine gender euphoria that put the first crack in my egg in 2016. I started actively questioning and exploring my gender in 2017, and I first started testing out new pronouns in 2018. I was assigned female at birth, so before all of this, the only pronouns I'd ever used were she, her. But the more I came into my non-binary trans identity, the more I found myself wanting to experiment with different pronouns, just like I'd already been experimenting with other forms of expression. For most non-binary people, the go-to pronouns are they, them. But I ruled those out pretty quickly because they were just not a good fit. They were way too neutral for someone as gender-full as me. She, her actually felt like a better fit than they, them, even though it still wasn't quite right. But I was really curious about he, him pronouns, and the thought of being called that was something I found super appealing. I had occasionally been called he and other sort of masculine coded words like man or bro or dude when I was cosplaying as male characters, but I'd never gotten to hear those terms applied to just myself out of cosplay, and I wanted to test that out and see how it felt. Of course, that was easier said than done, because asking people to call me he was really hard at first. So instead of requesting that outright, I started dipping my toes in the water by saying, you can call me he or she. What I was hoping would happen was that I would start hearing a mix of he, him, and she, her pronouns and get a sense of which one I liked better. But what actually happened is that if I gave people a choice, they would go with she, her every time. And like, I get it, because when you take into account things like my appearance, my voice, the fact that I'd always used she, her before I came out, I can see why some people would find that to be the easier option. But that wasn't helping me see how it felt to be called he, and I kept finding myself in these situations where more and more often I would want to ask for that, and I would even tell myself I'm going to ask for that, and then I would chicken out at the last minute. And I honestly don't know why it was so scary. I mean, I told my friends when I was questioning my gender, I was really open about the process on social media, but for some reason, in the moment, when the opportunity to ask for he, him pronouns came up, I just couldn't do it. Then I went to Wizard World in August of 2018, where I got to be on a panel about queer representation in popular media. And after that panel, I met a whole bunch of really awesome queer people and hung out with them. And when we were introducing ourselves, I said the usual, you can call me he or she, and one of them said, which one do you like better? So I saw an opportunity and I took it. And it was awesome. I finally got to spend several hours in a row being called by he, him pronouns. Yes, this was still a con, this was still a cosplay situation, and I was still dressed as a male character. But it was different from all those other times because I was finally having those pronouns directed at me for an extended conversation and not just at the character I was portraying. And it made something crystal clear. I had to just bite the bullet and start asking for he, him pronouns whenever I wanted to hear them. No more chickening out. So I made that my New Year's resolution for 2019. And I actually stuck to it, starting with Ichiban Con, where I wore my first pronoun accessory in public, and I made a lineup post before the con stating that my pronouns were he, him. And during the con, anytime someone called me she by accident, I reminded them to call me he every single time. Was it awkward? Yeah. Was it intimidating? Extremely. But it was so worth it, because that finally got me over this hurdle I'd been facing for more than a year at that point, and made it easier to ask for he, him pronouns from then on. So I kept this up all throughout 2019, and I sort of let my gender fluidity be my guide. When my gender was in more of a masculine place, I would ask for he, him pronouns, and when it was in more of a genderqueer place, I would say you can use he or she. 3 big things I learned from this. One, when I gave people that choice between he and she, they were still picking she every time, even though they were now used to calling me he sometimes. And that didn't feel super great because it was like, well, my lack of testosterone is definitely overpowering the way everyone sees me. But I also had no one but myself to blame because I had given them that choice. Two, there were times when I would ask for he/him pronouns only, and times when I would give people a choice between he and she, but there was never a time I asked for she/her pronouns only. Isn't that interesting? And three, while she/her pronouns felt okay sometimes, he/him pronouns gave me massive gender euphoria all the time. So as a result of this, I found myself wanting to be called he/him more and more, and I started to think of that as sort of my default or baseline set of pronouns. Something else that factored into this was that I was still closeted in 2 areas of my life, still am today, working on it, and that is with my family and at my job. So in those situations, I knew I was going to be called she/her all the time, and I really needed he/him pronouns all the rest of the time to balance that out. But of course, the biggest motivator was still gender euphoria. So overall, this New Year's resolution I made for 2019 was going really well. I had finally gotten over my fear of asking for he/him pronouns. I was really exploring all my pronoun feelings. I was making a lot of progress on this journey. And then 2020 happened. I could make a whole other video about what it's like to transition during a pandemic, but for this one I'm just going to stay focused on pronouns. At the time the world shut down, I was well past the questioning my gender phase and deeply into the deciding what the rest of my transition was going to look like phase. And one thing that kept getting me hung up was the fact that most of my dysphoria was social, meaning that it was caused by the way people perceive my gender in social interactions. And that gave me some imposter syndrome because I would ask myself things like, if you didn't have to have these social interactions, would you still have dysphoria and would you still need to transition? Well, there's nothing like a pandemic to help answer those exact questions. I got a major break from social dysphoria because I was no longer going shopping in person, going out to eat at restaurants, going to the movies, going to the gym, going on trips, all the places I used to have to deal with misgendering. And guess what? I was absolutely miserable. Bet you didn't see that coming. Of course, it was a relief to get rid of such a large source of dysphoria, but 2 other things happened that I didn't expect. One, in the absence of social dysphoria, my body dysphoria sort of magnified and expanded to fill the space. And 2, just like most of my dysphoria was social, so was most of my euphoria. So having that disappear along with my whole social life was a huge loss. On a positive note, because I do like to keep things positive around here, this got rid of all of my doubts and my imposter syndrome and let me know that I was on the right path in my transition. And having that extra confidence helped me reframe my thoughts about transitioning and allowed me to move forward. For example, once I was really honest with myself, I found that she/her pronouns just weren't doing it for me anymore. And I think it took so long to figure that out because it was never really about dysphoria. Being called things like ma'am, miss, lady, woman, girl, all of that stuff gives me so much dysphoria that it can ruin my whole day or even week. But she/her pronouns just don't have the same effect. I feel little to no dysphoria from being called she, so this was one of those situations where it was less about what pronouns felt wrong and more about what pronouns felt right. And that was overwhelmingly he/him. So once I understood that, and I made the choice to lean into my gender euphoria first and foremost, I made the extremely bold decision, or at least it felt that way at the time, of switching to he/him pronouns exclusively. Yay! Of course, full disclosure, when I say exclusively, I do just mean with people I'm out to, so everyone except my coworkers and my family. I'll get there with them one day. I want to wrap up with some thoughts about this major pronoun decision. 1, switching entirely to he/him pronouns felt like a major milestone in my transition, even more so than when I started testing out new pronouns for the first time. When I was still questioning my gender, I never really expected that this was where I was going to end up with pronouns, but it absolutely does feel right and feels like a major step forward. 2, in hindsight, I feel like I held on to my old she/her pronouns for way longer than I needed to. I kind of kept them around like a security blanket until I was ready to let them go. But at the same time, I think it was good that I went through such a long period of using those two sets of pronouns because it did help clarify a lot of things. 3, sort of on the flip side of that, I feel like the reason it took me so long to even try out he, him pronouns was I felt like I had to deserve them. Like I was only justified in asking for them if my gender was in a really masculine place, or like I shouldn't ask people for he, him if she, her wasn't gonna really bother me. And of course now I know that's ridiculous, but I think I caved to the pressure of feeling like I should only do things in my transition to alleviate dysphoria and not to boost euphoria. And I wish I had leaned into my euphoria more and switched to he, him pronouns exclusively a lot sooner. And 4, being a non-binary person who uses what a lot of people consider to be binary pronouns and who doesn't use they, them pronouns has been an eye-opening experience. And that was true when I was also using the two sets, he, him, and she, her, but it's even more so now that I'm just using he, him. It's shown that we have a long way to go when it comes to education and awareness, even within the trans community. Because no, using he, him does not make me a binary trans man. And by the same token, using only one set of pronouns instead of multiple sets doesn't make me any less gender fluid. I just happen to be comfortable with one set of pronouns no matter where my gender fluctuates. What I wish more people understood is that pronouns don't equal gender, they're just one way of expressing it. And with that, I'm gonna wrap up my long and winding tale about my journey with pronouns. I want to give a huge shout out to all of my amazing and supportive friends who rolled with the punches as I went through all of this exploration and who continue to affirm me with my pronouns today. It makes such a huge difference to have people like that in your life when you're transitioning, and I appreciate it so, so much. I also want to invite all of you watching to share your own pronoun journeys if you've ever been on one. Have you ever experimented with different pronouns to see what felt best? Have you ever used different sets of pronouns, changed your pronouns? What kinds of gender feelings do you get from the pronouns people call you? Please drop a comment below because I would love to get a discussion going. You can also reach out to me on other social media. I am GC Kinsey across all platforms. And while you're here, feel free to check out some of my other videos. I have cosplay music videos, I've got makeup tutorials and demos, and most recently I've started posting some recordings of what my singing voice sounds like before I go on testosterone. So make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss anything new. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your support. I hope you learned a lot of new things, and I will see you on the next one.